Welcome back to the Messy Reformation. My name's Jason Rice. I'm the lead pastor at Faith Community CRC in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. My co-host is Willie Cronky. He's a member at Pease CRC in Pease, Minnesota. We're just a couple of guys who love the Christian Reformed Church and want to see Reformation happen in our denomination. But we realize that whenever Reformation happens, in the history of the church, things get messy. And after the last couple of synods, nobody's going to disagree that things are really getting messy in the Christian Reformed Church. So we're having conversations with pastors throughout the Christian Reformed Church to find out what's going on in our denomination, but also to talk about what Reformation might look like. If you haven't already, take a moment, click subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming content. We're dropping episodes every single Sunday evening. It's also important for you to know that you are our marketing plan. We rely on you to spread the word about what we're doing at the Messy Reformation. We rely on you to share our content. We also rely on you to give us 5-star reviews and provide good feedback for our podcast so that the algorithms push our content out into the world. You are our marketing plan. You can also support us financially on Patreon or Substack. All of the money raised is used to fund online hosting and build the platform of the Messy Reformation. You may even see a Messy Reformation conference coming in 2024, so keep your eyes peeled for an announcement. With all that said, we're going to get to this week's episode, which is part 1 of our conversation with Stewart Jong. So Stewart, why don't you just kick us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and the church that you're at.
Yeah. So I grew up in California, and when some people, especially here in Iowa, when some people hear that, they're like, uh-oh. Because California is known for Los Angeles and San Francisco and not much else. But I grew up in the agricultural heart of California in the Central Valley, sort of between Hanford and Visalia, south of Ripon. Some of you listeners may know about Ripon and that Dutch pocket there. But in Visalia, there's another big Dutch pocket as well. Grew up on a dairy. My 4 older brothers are all still in dairy business, and I'm the last of 5 boys. So that was always fun, just following along and doing whatever was being done, working on the dairy, going to family events, going to church. It was a very, ordinary upbringing to me. Really enjoyed it. And growing up, I always figured I'd be in dairy business or agriculture some way or another. But God called me into ministry. So now my family my wife and I, we've been married for just over 5 years now. And we got to celebrate our anniversary, a week and a couple of days ago. And at our wedding reception, the pastor I had grown up under, he was talking to my wife, Christine, and I was talking to an aunt and uncle, and he says, well, I still really think Stewart should go to seminary. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't quite out of the blue. It was something I had heard some growing up. I had the opportunity to read scripture or a prayer or a responsive reading or something in front of church. And typically, an elder or somebody would say, oh, Stewart, you should become a pastor. And I was in 7th, 8th grade, freshman year, high school. I've never thought good Bible reading was a qualification for ministry, right? It's there's a whole lot more there, but that's part of it. And being comfortable speaking in front of people goes a long ways, at least. And my pastor encouraged me some in that way. Grew up under Lambert Sycamore. Some of listeners may know him, but during my profession of faith, he was, talking about me and encouraging me after I had made the vows and such. And he's like, well, and maybe Stewart will join in ministry someday. And that just completely out of the blue, right? We went through Cornelius Plantinga's book, A Sure Thing, for our profession of faith class, and didn't say anything all summer. And then right there in front of church, just kind of blurted that out. It's like, oh boy.
Interesting.
And so from that point, it was kind of on my radar a little bit. When I was looking at colleges, I visited Dort junior and senior year of high school, mostly just for fun, because most of my cousins went to Dort. And so you go visit Dort, you see all your cousins, you have a fun time, and the trip is pretty cheap. But while I was at Dort, I asked, is there a pre-ministry degree? And maybe there is now, but there wasn't at the time. And so that kind of cooled my interests. Ended up going to Cal Poly, California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, and I got my Bachelor of Science in Wine and Viticulture. I wanted to stay in agriculture, but I picked something pretty much the opposite direction of dairy business. And it was an interesting opportunity. The wine world is not for me. It's too much marketing and self-promoting and self-aggrandizement for my tastes. And ended up working for a ag chemicals company, and then worked for my uncle. And that was when I got married and really started discerning the call. We have 3 kids now. Our youngest will be a year old in December, and our oldest just became 3 years old in June. Okay. So we've got our hands full of blessings. It's a lot of fun, and there's many sleepless nights.
Yeah, I remember those years. Yeah, we're in a different stage of life here. We've got 2 in college and one that just got her driver's license yesterday, and then our youngest is 11. So yeah, it puts us in a little different stage of life. But I remember the early years. Good fun years for sure. Yeah, we'll have to reach out to you eventually when we decide to come out with our own line of messy Reformation wines, because
no, that'd be wrong. I was always more interested in the growing side of things, and I didn't spend that much time tasting wines. And so, my family, between semesters at college or what have you, they'd ask me about this wine or that wine, and I'm like, I don't know. I'm more interested in, our family was quite the cheap beer family, and so we're not a very high culture family. I like wine, but I'm not too particular.
Sure, gotcha. And so, what was your call to ministry like then? What kind of finally pushed you over the edge to decide to go to seminary and pursue this call then?
Yeah. So early on, while we were dating, my wife and I was able to read scripture for a cousin's wedding, and CJ Dendulk was the one. What's that called? He was the minister for the wedding. And after the rehearsal, he says, "You know what? Have you ever thought about seminary? There's this really great one in Southern California, Westminster. You should really check it out." And I was vaguely aware of Westminster. Our family originally moved from Holland to Southern California and has plenty of ties to Escondido. And so when I told that to my wife, when we had been dating maybe a month at the time, and she was dating this dairy boy, ag industry kind of guy, and so her antenna just went straight up. Am I going to be marrying a pastor now? Because that's a whole different dynamic. And so I just I put ice on that idea. I was like, no, that's, I thought about it in high school a little bit, but I'm not interested. And I don't think so. And so that was, put that behind us. But then here comes our wedding reception, and Pastor Lambert said that to Christine, and she tells me on our honeymoon that he had said this. So we're sitting in our cottage in Cabo San Lucas. It's like, oh, well, yeah, maybe I should think about this. And Christine was a great aid for me in discernment. She trained in social work, and so she really knew how to get a person to think. She knew how to ask those questions and to force me to examine my gifts and think about it well. And so, that started with, I was a cadet counselor at the time, so had some leadership growth there. We started leading a small group Bible study at our home based on the sermon series, and all that material it was prepared by the staff at church, so there was very little homework to be done. It was hosting and being patient enough to ask the questions. So that was helpful in discerning that. Like, can I lead these things? Can we facilitate these things? And the more I talked to some of my college friends about my character, and the more I let other people know, they kind of affirmed that. I did enjoy having deep conversations and walking alongside of people through various struggles or issues in life. My college roommates always knew that I was somebody they could bounce ideas off of. And so that was really cool. And, kindergarten teacher, third grade teacher, eighth grade teacher come up to me at church, after we started saying stuff, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we pegged you for it." But nobody had said much, or nobody had come alongside and really mentored and developed and ushered me towards that. And I think that's something the CRC and probably a lot of the American and the Western church needs to grow in. I'm trying to remember. Somebody pointed me to a quote or an article by, who is it who runs the Foundry? He was the professor at the Bible College in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, Branson Parlor.
Yes, Branson Parlor has an article about, where is your next pastor coming from?
Yeah.
And we really need to learn how to farm pastors and promote pastors from within rather than buy them from outside. And that's something that's very foreign to our academic system.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's been something we've been talking about a lot lately on our podcast, really discipleship, but even to just kind of build that into just even your own story. I think it's a helpful conversation for us to have, because you had mentioned you've had people kind of nudge a little bit here and there and say, "Hey, maybe you should check this out," but we haven't done a good job, not in general, of saying, "Hey, would you be willing to walk alongside me as I kind of help shepherd you into this," right? Rather than kind of just poking and prodding and nudging a little bit here and there, but saying, "Hey, let's sit down and have some of those conversations." And I can't remember what the exact name of that article is by Branson Parlor, but I'd encourage every listener to go read that one. Hopefully we'll find it. We'll put it in the show notes, or we'll put it in the summary of the podcast episode so that people can look at it. But it's really pointing out that we can't be relying on other churches to be raising up the leaders for our church. We have to start doing it on our own, especially thinking about the future of pastors. And in the Christian Reformed Church, we're going to have a massive crisis coming up soon for pastors. And now I don't have the exact percentages on the top of my head right now, but I think I just saw that I think 40% of our pastors in the Christian Reformed Church right now are over the age of 55, I think.
Oh boy.
And so we have this huge, in the next, I think like 30% of our pastors are going to retire in the next 5 to 6, 7 years. And so we're already having a pretty significant, I don't have official numbers on this. This is just the feeling I get, that we have already a fairly significant pastoral shortage right now. I know a lot of churches that are looking and having a hard time finding pastors, and we have less candidates coming in right now. And so we already have a shortage, and we're going to have even more of a shortage coming up here in the future. And so nobody can be relying on, "Hey, we're going to find some other church who's going to raise up a pastor for us in the future." We really have to start saying, who in our church are we going to start raising up to be a shepherd of the flock and possibly a shepherd of our church?
Yeah. And I think one difficult dynamic of that is, Jesus mentions it in one of the Gospels. He goes back to Nazareth and says, no town wants a prophet from their hometown, right? Or the prophet is not accepted in his home or something. And I think there is some truth to that dynamic for pastoring or for ministry as well. I'm grew up with the same idols and difficulties and blind spots as my church that I grew up in. And so I think there is some value in moving, just a little bit away, in being a little bit separated from the place where we are the pastor. However, one struggle that we've had, ever since we moved from California to Michigan, and I've got some cousins in Michigan, and there were some real beautiful friendships that I was able to begin there, but it's not the same as having in-laws and family and cousins and friends who you are used to building you up and walking alongside of and doing fun stuff and silly stuff and easy stuff. You have to renew and start all new relationships the moment you move. And that's really hard. Our oldest son, he was born in 2020, and we weren't able to have, the baby shower and all the physical in-person stuff. For one, because of COVID, and second, it was difficult because, we haven't really built a lot of friendships yet. There aren't a whole lot of young couples with kids that we're already friends with, right? And so that transplanting issue, I think, is an unhealthy one. I've heard it talked about, and it would be best if we could be, the next county over, or maybe a state away, so that you're within a day or a few hour drive of where you come from. That way you can retreat and be renewed in those old relationships while also being far enough away that you're not necessarily clinging to those too tightly. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something, until the car and the airplane, people did not leave their hometown unless they really had to. And I think we exploit that mobility too much today.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you think about it, it's only in the last 100 years, and not even in the last 100 years. Even 100 years ago, it was a big deal to take a trip of a couple hours in a vehicle, And so in the last 75 years, this mobility has changed a lot. But prior to that, pastors did a lot of times kind of pastor the area that they grew up in. I've pushed back. I mean, I get some of the tensions. I've seen, the church I grew up in, I could see how I would have had a hard time pastoring, shepherding that church because of just some of the growing up there and, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But there's also, some of the flip side of that is also when you grow up in a church, if you're shepherding that church, the people really well, the people better than anybody. And that's a good thing. And it can be a struggle as well, right? But the good thing is people aren't. You just know them. You can read someone if they're struggling or hurting, and that, hey, this person doesn't talk about that kind of stuff much, so I got to kind of nudge them a little bit. You kind of know some of the tensions in the community that you can try to be more delicately walking around, right? So there's those kind of things, and the congregation knows you. Then, I mean, there's no like. You don't come in and everybody thinks you're a rock star, right? Because they're like, oh, we know this person. They've whatever. So there's some of those benefits. Can also be the negatives as well, right? They can have you can have some of the same blind spots. You can have some of the same idols. You can have all of. So, but I think we need to be rethinking some of that a little bit. Mm-hmm. I've encouraged a lot of churches to not just automatically. Take the line like a prophet's not without honor in his own town, right? Because when Jesus said that was not a proverb.
That was a judgment, actually.
Yeah, that was a bad statement on his own community. But there's something to us thinking through those things. But I think we need to rethink some of that as we look toward the future, for sure.
And that does make me think we're not used to discipline. We're not used to correcting each other and calling each other out and building each other up. And it was a meme I saw ages ago about how church discipline should work. And it was maybe on, anyways, it was Facebook somewhere. And it was, two guys talking to each other, and it's, person A says, oh, brother, you've sinned and you need to turn back to Christ and continue in the way of life. And man B says, oh, thank you, brother. I appreciate your loving correction of me. I've also noticed some things in you. Let's walk towards Christ together. And it's a beautiful thing of what brotherhood and sisterhood in Christ should look like. But too often it's, hey, you're doing this wrong. And person B says, well, so are you. So then I'm not going to be corrected. It's we would rather refuse correction than admit humility.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's been, that is really the big conversation we're having right now, right? In the Christian Reformed Church, especially in light of, some of the current things happening in the Christian Reformed Church regarding sexuality, stuff flowing out of Synod 2022, 2023. And as people are looking forward to Synod 2024, the big conversation really is what is discipline going to look like? And because this is one of the things we've talked about quite a bit on the podcast is, as a denomination, we've been really unfaithful in discipline for the last 20 years, right? There really has been no discipline on a denominational level, right? On a higher level. And so it is going to be really hard for us to get to the point of actually doing discipline. And yet I think it's becoming more and more obvious that that's what's needing to happen. And so we got to figure out a way for what that's going to look like.
Yeah, while we're talking about discipline, I was actually recently visiting with somebody talking about the last two synods, because this person was saying, well, the CRC really doesn't do discipline. And I said, by and large, that is probably true. But if we're going to take an honest, sober look at some of the things that have happened in 2022 and 2023, I mean, we did actually put Neeland Avenue under discipline and told them to remove their deacon in question. Whether or not they were compliant with that is another matter. But that actually is a form of discipline that we have not seen in the Christian Reformed Church in a very long time. And apart from that, Synod this year, 2023, did reject Neeland Avenue's appeal. So I think that is also a form of discipline, at least in word. We need to work on the indeed part, like you're hinting at right now. But as you're saying, we're trying to figure out how to do this right now because we're a denomination that discipline has been foreign to.
Yeah.
So we are in the messy process of figuring out what this looks like on the ecclesiastical level in a local church, on the classical level in your classis, and on the synodical level. So we are working through these things together, and by God's grace, I believe he's on the move.
Yeah, and I want to jump on that because on another positive note, because I appreciate what you just said, Willie. It's there's some who really are getting frustrated saying we're not doing any discipline. And really what I think the honest representation of what's happening is we're maybe not doing discipline as quickly or as decisively as some would hope it would be. But even on a positive note right now, Synod 2023 did instruct all classes, right, to guide bearing office bearers into compliance. That is a form of discipline, saying, hey, if you have people in your classes who are not functioning in line with our doctrinal standards, bring them into line. And it's telling classes, do your job, right? And they encourage church visitors to do that as well. And I think it's important because not everybody realizes some of these things that are going on, but there's really an active training being done throughout the denomination for regional pastors and church visitors on what it looks like for them to guide erring office bearers into compliance. And so I just sent an email out as stated clerk of Classes Wisconsin. I got some information from Thrive, and maybe not everybody's excited about Thrive, but Thrive sent me some information saying here's training information we're creating to help regional pastors and church visitors guide erring office bearers into compliance. And so they're having conversations with regional pastors, church visitors, trying to help them figure out how to carry out this discipline on a local level. So that's happening. And I know of classes who have taken this really seriously, and they've got their church visitors in action doing the work of discipline. And so people get frustrated because we don't see it at synod yet per se, but on the local level, on the more local level of classes, it's actually happening in a lot of ways. And I think we should be encouraged by that.
Well, and I just got to say, I think that also puts our denominational structure, our ecclesiology, where it should be. Right? The authority and the power is first supposed to lie in the local church. And then if they cannot, kind of bring things into order on themselves, they can appeal to classis and then classis to synod. And that is how our denominational structure is actually supposed to function. So as somebody who's just functionally Presbyterian, I see 8C that was passed as a very positive thing, because it actually puts the onus of responsibility on the channels that you've suggested are in place right now.
Yeah, it's there's a family in our area here in near Austinville. Yeah, I'm the pastor in Austinville CRC. I don't think I mentioned that earlier.
Got there
but there's a family around here. They don't come to our church, but one of their children was having heart problems early on. And so they had to go super easy on this kid so that they wouldn't raise their heart rate too much or stress their body out too much before they were able to do surgery or therapy or something along those lines. And so when the day came that child was finally able to be disciplined and they were able to stop avoiding all stressors, it was really hard. And I think we're in that same situation in our denomination. We're so unused to, on a broad level, we're so unused to following through on what we say from synod or from classes that everybody's kind of getting some shock, and it's taking a long time to learn, and it's bouncing around before we can really get into the groove of what it looks like to make a decision and then follow through on it. In what year was it with kinism? Maybe 2019. And that was, did that church leave, or the minister just left? Who was the offending party there, rather than receive discipline, it was the wave goodbye, which is a sad thing.
Yeah, for sure. So I am more hopeful than I have been for a while. I know there's some, one of the things I've noticed recently, and by the time this podcast comes out, it won't be as recently, but I've said I've noticed a level of anxiety amongst conservatives. I'm not sure what it is, but I think you get about 6 months out of synod and you realize the next synod's coming up and people are like, what are we doing? And what if this doesn't happen? And people are starting to get nervous about what it's going to look like and what needs to happen at this next synod. And I keep wanting to just kind of tell people, like, just relax, just breathe a little bit. Like, for one, God's still in control. He's Lord of his church, right? And there's a lot happening that you don't know about. And not everybody needs to know everything, because, we're not some secret coup of a group, as people want to claim. It's just a bunch of people doing stuff. And we just trust, and we keep being faithful where we're at and being faithful doing what God has called us to do. And then we see what happens at this upcoming synod. And if, things turn sideways, then we have different conversations. But I have this level of confidence because I see God. I really, truly believe I see God doing a work in the Christian Reformed Church. I see him bringing us out of total faithlessness, what we've been for a long time, into a position of more faithfulness and more biblical confessional fidelity. And we're working our way there. It's going to take a while, and there's going to be some pains, because we are going to lose some churches in the way, and the budget, just practical stuff. Budgets are going to be a mess for a little bit, and positions are going to have to get cut. We're going to have to talk about restructuring. Like, all that's going to happen as we move forward, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just growing pains as we kind of shift and pull ourselves out of the pit that we've dug ourselves into, and we start living in a more faithful direction.
Yeah, I think talking about growth, that reminds me of the whole Classis Florida or Classis Southeast and the push and the request for evangelism. I can remember in youth group once or twice going out and trying to hand out lemonade and playing, bigger and better, trying to talk to people a little and get get to know the neighborhood around our church a little bit. But in seminary, oh man, I was talking with some seminary friends a while back, and we were like, man, we should have been out downtown every Friday afternoon and evening and street preaching and trying to evangelize. That would have been a really great experience instead of taking a class trying to teach evangelism and missions and not engaging in it whatsoever. And I think as we seek to share the gospel, as we seek to be the instruments God creates us for the growth of the kingdom and for the growth of the church, those activities will make important how we define sin, how we define the covenant that we join into as far as the covenant of office bearers is concerned, and how we understand the covenant that God brings us into. If we are seeking to share the gospel, we have to clearly understand sin. We have to clearly define it, clearly present it, clearly confront it, while also being humble and realizing, hey, we're confronting sinners. We ourselves are sinners, and we also need to grow and be sanctified. I would like to learn evangelism better and get to engage it, but I'm here in a small town. I don't get out a whole lot. I'm trying to, first of all, just learn how to shepherd this congregation over which I've been ordained and which I'm trying to serve and lead, and trying to figure out all those dynamics first. I've been here a year and a week in ordained ministry, and it's a year and a month and a half since we moved to Iowa.
Yeah.
And so that's plenty of growing pains and plenty of figuring out what I suck at and what I'm okay at and what I'm good at.
That's right.
And learning what to say no to.
Yeah, there was another podcast I'll encourage listeners to check out. It's a podcast called Grace in Common. And it's by James Eglinton and Grace Utanto and Marinus DeYoung and Corey Brock. They're all Bavinck scholars, and so for the most part, they're Bavinck scholars or Klaas Schilder, which is another like old Dutch theologian that's pretty great. And but anyways, they talk about a lot of things, and they have a recent podcast called Porches in the United States, or Porches in North America, something like that, where they kind of build off of this idea that came out of Abraham Kuyper, and then an article that Tim Keller wrote right before he passed away. He actually got the first part written, and then he died before he could write the second part. But the article by Keller is called Lemonade on the Porch. But anyways, he's talking about, so Kuyper had this idea like 120 years ago of the temple, like the Jewish temple had a forecourt, right? There was a court, like the court of the Gentiles. There was an aspect where people could like kind of enter in, but not be fully in, right? There's kind of this middle ground between the church, the temple, and the world, right? And he had talked about, and they're talking a lot about how that space between the church and the world today is like shrinking, right? Because the church is there's a lot going on, but because of another language that people talk about is this negative world, right? The world is becoming more anti-Christian. And so there's less like middle ground between the church and the world. Anyways, it's an interesting idea to get us thinking about evangelism anyways, is Kuyper's idea is that the church needs to start finding more of these middle grounds. Not that we need to move our theology into these middle grounds, but we just need to be present in these spaces where we're interacting. And so Keller used the idea of front porches, right? A porch is a place where you can come up and talk to somebody on the porch, but you don't have to go in their house. It's kind of a simple, easy space. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately, especially when it comes to evangelism and gospel proclamation, is what maybe not even the church creating its own porches. That's kind of what that podcast was talking about, but really us thinking about what spaces are just in our community where people are hanging out already, right? Where non-Christians are hanging out. Maybe we just need to be present there and then build some relationships, and not even necessarily like street preaching. I'm not against street preaching. That can be effective in some places, but just being present in places where there's non-Christians, building relationships, having conversations, and being just a faithful believer out in public. I think that seems to be probably the most effective way right now to really open up the door for good gospel proclamation.
Yeah, it's I've read some of The Gospel Comes with a House Key by Rosaria Butterfield, and that's kind of getting towards that idea of hospitality. And my wife recently, I don't know if she read a book, it's called Holy Hygie, something along, and it's along the lines of hospitality and having a space to welcome people into our lives. And nothing has to be perfect. You don't have to have your house spick and span and spotless and shining, but to invite people into your life. And that doesn't have to be in your own home, right? There's some neighborhoods, there's some situations, there's some circumstances where that's not possible or it's not recommendable. And so, yeah, finding those neutral places or those already existing community grounds where we can have a low barrier to entry and we can build relationships with people and present the gospel in its truth and beauty, but not force it on somebody, right? Coming into church is an intimidating thing for somebody who hasn't come in a month or a year or ever. And so it's I don't know, it's always seemed kind of backwards to me to say, hey, invite the nearest unbeliever to you to church next week as an evangelism tactic. That seems so backwards to me.
That's all we have for this week. If you want to help us out and support the Messy Reformation, another thing you can do is sign up for our newsletter through Substack. That way, you'll get episodes and summaries sent directly to your email inbox. It will also give us the opportunity to communicate with our audience, which is one of the biggest struggles of a podcast. So head over to the Messy Reformation on Substack and sign up for our newsletter. Now, stay tuned next week for part 2 of our conversation with Stewart Jong. But until then, don't forget this is Christ's church, and he bought it with his blood. And we've been warned that wolves will come in trying to destroy the flock. So, keep a close watch on your life and on your doctrine. Preach the word in season and out of season. And keep fighting the good fight in this messy Reformation.